guess who's back from the dead? Hey there again, it's your boy, still too poor to afford a better camera. Anyways, today's video topic is on Resident Evil, more specifically, Resident Evil 4. So, I'm not gonna lie, I had a script written for this video, and I wrote the script about 4 different times, and I finally sat down and recorded all the lines, and gave it over to my editor, and promptly decided that I didn't like it anymore. So, what you're going to watch today is probably just ad-libbed. I'm garbage at this, but, you know, I don't think about it too much. Maybe you won't notice. Hopefully you don't notice, because I don't have a script anymore. But this is going to be a love letter to Capcom. Konami. A love letter to Capcom. You know, because I like to write love letters here. Anyways, hopefully you enjoy the video. And without further ado, let's talk about Resident Evil 4. Like I said at the start of this video, I tried to write the script for this video about 4 times, and I just wasn't really feeling it. I don't know, I'm going through this whole thing where I'm trying to rebrand my channel, and I don't really know what's working, so I'm just kind of trying to do what feels right, and I think this feels right. But the thing about no script is that this is going to be like a stream of conscious sort of thing, and it's probably not going to be very great, and the jokes probably aren't going to land very well, because it's kind of off at the top of my head, but hopefully this works. So, for those of you that know me, which at this point probably isn't a lot of you, but for those of you that do know me, you might know that I suffer from a bit of a rare condition called, oh my god, please help me, I can't stop playing Resident Evil syndrome. It's bad. There's millions of us. We suffer in silence every day. Or we did, up until recently when Resident Evil 2 dropped. I have to admit, when I first saw the announcement for Resident Evil 2 Remake, I was cautiously optimistic. If you know anything about me, or you've seen my stream, or anything at all, you probably would know that Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time. And I do believe that the Leon we had in Resident Evil 4 is probably the best iteration of Leon we ever had. No offense to Matthew Mercer at all and his portrayal of Leon. I absolutely love the guy, and Critical Role is the best thing to happen in my life since I realized that I could drown my relationship problems in alcohol. Disclaimer, please don't do drugs, those are bad for you. But, in my humble and unprofessional opinion, I believe Resident Evil 4 saw the best Leon we could have. So when I saw that they were taking Leon and Claire from Resident Evil 2 and trying to bring them down to a younger level, I suppose is the word I would use for it, I was sort of scared that we would lose something in translation. Anyways, none of that really matters right now because when the game dropped, most, if not all, of my fears were immediately addressed, and we got the amazing game that is the RE Remake. Now, the questions are, what am I doing here? What is this video going to address? How am I going to pay the rent? Where am I going to find food at? These are questions that I don't really have the answer to. That's a lie. I have the answer to the first 2. I'm a massive liar. This video is about not Resident Evil 2. This video is about Resident Evil 4, and how I personally believe that if we hadn't had Resident Evil 4, and then by extension 5 and 6, which I see as growing pains for the franchise, we wouldn't be where we are today. So, let's start this video off by talking about Resident Evil Survivor. Gotcha, we're not talking about Resident Evil 4 today, we're talking about Resident Evil Survivor. That's a big lie, but Resident Evil Survivor is part of what I want to talk about. Because I want to talk about where the series started to shift away from that retro style that everybody remembers. You know, the tank controls and the fixed camera angles and all that stuff. Now, to the typical outside viewer, Resident Evil 4 looks like the turning point for the franchise, where we started to see the different control schemes and a more action shift. But Resident Evil 4 wasn't the first game to start to play with these concepts. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Resident Evil Survivor was the first one to do that. Now keep in mind, I am going off the cuff, and most of this is just my Resident Evil knowledge in my own head, so I could be wrong, but I think Resident Evil Survivor was the first one to really change the formula. Resident Evil Survivor came out in 2000, maybe 2001, I'm not sure right now, I'll probably fact check and throw it up on the screen later. But Resident Evil Survivor came out, and it was a first-person shooter that, if I'm not mistaken, was supposed to be played with a light gun. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, I'll throw up that information on the screen now. But Resident Evil Survivor was a first-person shooter, set in a sort of offshoot story that I don't know too much about because honestly I haven't played the game and I really don't intend to because it's not that great. Shout out to all the 2 Resident Evil Survivor fans out there. I'm sorry if I offended you. Please don't hate me. But Resident Evil Survivor was the first one to do this sort of shift to a different style of doing things. This time period marks an odd area in Capcom when they were experimenting with other things. There was Resident Evil Outbreak, which was a very strange online multiplayer Resident Evil that was played back on the PlayStation 2 with that online adapter. Then there was also Resident Evil Survivor 2, which was an obscure arcade game that only released in Japan and then was later ported to PlayStation 2, where it was only released in Japan and Europe. Resident Evil Survivor 2 was a lot like Resident Evil Survivor 1, but whereas Survivor 1 was an actual installment with story, Survivor 2 was just an arcade game that used the same sort of controls, the first-person perspective. But it did follow the story of Code Veronica. Out of this time period, we also got a game that's sort of a guilty pleasure of mine, Resident Evil Dead Aim. Resident Evil Dead Aim was another first-person shooter that was meant to be used with a light gun, but when you weren't shooting, you had an over-the-shoulder camera view a la Resident Evil 4. Dead Aim followed a sort of spin-off story where you were Bruce MacGyver going after Morpheus D. Duval, an Umbrella R&D researcher. The whole thing took place on a cruise ship that had been overrun by the infected from the T-virus. I don't remember what virus was in the game, but it was a great game. I had a lot of fun with that game. It was actually kind of spooky. Dead Aim released in 2003, and then 2 years later, we would finally have Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube. Now that we've caught all the way up to the game that I want to talk about, let's backtrack again. Resident Evil 4 is actually the 13th game to use the Resident Evil name, I believe. Or at least I think that's what a Wikipedia article told me at like 1 in the morning, so it's anybody's guess if that was accurate or not. Regardless, to the outside viewer, Resident Evil 4 just kind of looks like the next game, but there were so many games after Resident Evil 3, before Resident Evil 4, that I believe may or may not have played a role in shaping what Resident Evil 4 would become. Obviously, the biggest ones that stand out to me in this respect are Dead Aim and Survivor 1. I don't really think Survivor 2 played much of a role because it's, that obscure arcade game that was only in Japan, and, suffice it to say, I just kind of wanted to shine a spotlight on Survivor and Dead Aim. Although most people think Survivor is hot garbage, and I'm kind of one of them. And then other people also think Dead Aim is hot garbage, but I don't really think Dead Aim is hot garbage. I think Dead Aim is an interesting concept, and I really like Dead Aim a lot, so give those games a look-see if you're feeling froggy. Anyways, I believe that those games might have in part contributed to how Resident Evil 4 turned out. And I believe personally that Resident Evil 4 is the reason that we now have Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, 2 of what I would consider the best modern Resident Evil titles. Now here comes the part of the video you've all been dreading, the part where I absolutely jerk Resident Evil 4 off all over this video. Resident Evil 4 is my favorite game of all time. If you've seen my Kingdom Hearts video, you might think that Kingdom Hearts is my favorite video game of all time, and I may have even said that in the video, but if I did, that was a lie. A lie fueled by nostalgia, most likely. Resident Evil 4 is my favorite game ever. I couldn't tell you how many times I've beaten that game on PlayStation 2, because I've had like 3 different memory cards, and I've had to go through the game hundreds of times at least. And that's not even talking about how much time I put into the Mercenaries or Ada's campaign, and how many times I may have replayed her campaign, and then Assignment Ada. Not only that, but I own the game on 3 different consoles. I have it on PC, PlayStation 2, and GameCube, and I've beaten it multiple times on GameCube and PC as well. So there's even more tallies for the board. I believe Resident Evil 4 did something for the series that it really needed. It took the old formula of tank controls and fixed camera angles and made them more approachable. It changed up everything so that it was easier for a general audience member to get in on it. Now, I love the fixed camera angles and tank controls just as much as the next RE fan. It's amazing, and I love the classic games no matter what. However, I do believe that the changes Resident Evil 4 made to the formula were needed. Your general casual gamer wasn't really into the tank controls and the fixed camera angles. Changing that to the over-the-shoulder style made for a more approachable system. I also do believe that Resident Evil 4 knew how to balance the action with the creep factor. 4 did this amazing thing where it had the build-up and the tension and the fear factor of the old Resident Evil games, and that build-up would pay off in the form of the great combat that the game had. It complemented itself nicely. This is in contrast to how Resident Evil 5 and 6 handled it, where the whole game was action rather than the payoff being action. To top off this metaphorical bukkake on Resident Evil 4's face, I'd like to talk about the atmosphere of the game. The game had 3 distinct areas: the village, the castle, and then the prison island. And each one of these areas felt distinctly different and creepy in their own ways, and it was brilliant. The farm had this eerie vibe going on where at certain points when the music took a back seat in favor of the farmland ambiance, you would kind of feel alone and isolated. And this was promptly shattered whenever you got found and suddenly you had to run for your life or defend yourself. I think that the farm area might be my favorite because it's the most grounded in reality, the most realistic sort of setting in the place. It gave this weird vibe where you felt like you were alone and it was just you against this village trying to find the president's daughter. The next area after that would be the castle. The castle just had beautiful architecture. I loved a lot of the rooms and how they looked. But aside from that, the castle lacked the creep factor that I believe the island and the farm had. Don't get me wrong though, I love the castle. I absolutely adore the castle. There's so many weird contraptions and eccentric things that you would think you'd find in a castle like that. But I do feel like it kind of breaks the flow a little bit. If you can ignore it for long enough, eventually that feeling kind of goes away. But the castle seems so far out of place when you think about the farm and the island. The island, however, if the farm is my favorite, would be my second favorite. The island was packed chock full of tight, claustrophobic areas and terrifying enemies. You never knew when you would run into something that would just immediately decimate you. And don't even get me started on the regenerators. I've had so many nightmares about those things. I'm almost 21, and those things still terrify me. On that note, all of the monsters and all of the characters, except Ashley, were very memorable and interesting. I loved every one of them. Lewis was a delight. Ada was great, as always. Salazar and Sadler were interesting bad guys, and it was kind of fun to watch Leon bant with them. All in all, as if it was a surprise to anybody, Resident Evil 4 is my favorite game. Favorite Resident Evil game, favorite game in general. Honestly, if you ask me in 2 weeks, I'll probably say it's Persona 3 or something else, but Resident Evil 4 is at least in the rotation of games that I constantly say are my favorite games. Now that I'm done completely creaming over Resident Evil 4, let's get to the point of this video, about, 12 minutes or something into this? The point of this video is that I believe Resident Evil 4 was the turning point that created what we have now, and I always like to be thankful for where we came from, so consider this a love letter to Capcom, since love letters seem to be what I'm doing with this channel now. Resident Evil 4, in some part at least, created the direction that we would go in for 5 and 6. This might be a surprise to any Resident Evil fans out there. I don't hate 5 and 6. I'm very far from hating them. I legitimately enjoyed both of those games. Granted, I do believe that they are better action games than they are Resident Evil games, and I do believe that they're best played with a friend, because I can guarantee you I would not have had as much fun with those games if I didn't play them with a friend. I do believe that those games had problems, very big problems. I think Capcom forgot the horror when they crafted those games, and they just kind of made an action game. Sort of like how the Resident Evil movies kind of forgot that horror was part of the franchise. I'm talking about the live-action ones, not the animated ones. I legitimately believe the animated ones are really entertaining movies, even if they are entertaining in the same way that 5 and 6 are entertaining. I think 5 and 6 were sort of like growing pains for the franchise. Just like how maybe DMC, the reboot, might have been growing pains for Devil May Cry so that we could get the 5 that we're getting now. If it weren't for the missteps that 5 and 6 made, just like if it weren't for the missteps that the DMC reboot made, we may not have what we have now. And if it weren't for Resident Evil 4 flipping the entire script on its head, we wouldn't have anything close to what we're having now. But that's just my unprofessional opinion on this whole thing. In closing, Capcom, you're doing amazing. You're killing it. Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Devil May Cry 5, I have not stopped creaming since you guys started this. It is a big problem. I cannot keep my pants on. You need to stop, actually. This is serious. Please help me. Jokes aside, though, Capcom, you're doing great. You're doing amazing. Keep it up, babe. I love you. For everyone else out there who just watched me bukkake over Resident Evil 4 for a solid, 20 minutes, I suppose, thanks for watching. Hope you had fun. Maybe you enjoyed yourself. Maybe you laughed a little bit. Maybe you did that little breathe out through your nose laugh that everybody does when they're alone, because people don't usually laugh while they're alone. That's weird. Not saying that you're weird for laughing alone if you did laugh alone. I'm just saying that normally people don't laugh alone. They just do the, that thing where they breathe out of their nose. Before I dig myself into an even deeper verbal hole, let me sign off. Hope you enjoyed yourself. If you did enjoy yourself, hopefully you'll enjoy the next video. I don't know when the next video is coming out, because my upload schedule is beyond unpredictable. Who knows if I'll even get up in the morning tomorrow? Hopefully I do. Maybe I won't. Who knows? At this point, honestly, my life is like one big coin flip. However, I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you did enjoy yourself, maybe you'll like the next one. Hopefully the next one will be funnier. Maybe I'll be able to actually write a script for the next one. Maybe. Probably not. It's probably not. But I hope you enjoyed yourself. Be kind to each other out there. Only get so many trips around the sun. Have a good day.